Emperor Drakmor stepped through the shimmering portal into his throne room, his massive claws clicking against the black marble floor. The ancient dragon lord stood 15 feet tall, his crimson scales gleaming in the dim light. He had returned 3 months early from the brutal war against the Void Swarm, expecting to find his palace in perfect order, just as he had left it. Instead he found complete chaos. The first thing that hit him was the noise. His palace, which should have been silent except for the whispered footsteps of terrified servants, buzzed with activity. Voices echoed through the halls, not in fear but in conversation and laughter. Children were playing somewhere nearby, their giggles bouncing off stone walls that had never heard such sounds. Drakmor's golden eyes narrowed as he took in the scene before him. His throne room, a place where enemies once trembled before his judgment, had been transformed into something unrecognizable. Long wooden tables filled the space where prisoners used to kneel. Hundreds of beings from different worlds sat together, eating and talking like old friends. The sight made his ancient heart race with confusion and anger. A small figure emerged from what used to be his private weapon storage room, now somehow converted into a kitchen. Steam followed her out, carrying the smell of fresh bread and cooked meat. It was Maya, his human maid, carrying a pot so large it seemed impossible for her small frame to manage. Her dark skin glistened with sweat, and flour dusted her simple work clothes. Maya looked up at the towering dragon emperor, completely unfazed by his intimidating presence. Where others would have dropped to their knees in terror, she simply wiped her hands on her apron and smiled. "Oh good, you're back early," she said in her calm voice, as if greeting a neighbor returning from vacation instead of an all-powerful dragon lord. "Perfect timing actually. We're serving dinner to about 4,000 tonight, and I could use an extra pair of hands." She gestured toward a closet that Drakmor had never noticed before. "There's an apron in there that should fit you. Well, maybe not perfectly, but it'll do. The soup course starts in 20 minutes, and these folks have been working hard all day. They deserve a good meal." Drakmor stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. In all his thousands of years of existence, no one had ever spoken to him so casually. No one had ever asked him to help with kitchen work. No one had ever ignored his terrifying presence so completely. Maya continued talking as she moved between the tables, checking on the diners. "The medical teams finished up in the East Wing about an hour ago. We saved most of the wounded soldiers from the Centauri battle. Dr. Wilson says they'll all make full recoveries, which is amazing considering how bad they looked when they arrived." She paused to ruffle the hair of a small alien child who tugged at her skirt. The little one had purple skin and large black eyes, clearly from one of the distant mining worlds. "Yes, honey, dinner will be ready soon. Go wash your hands with the others." Turning back to Drakmor, Maya continued her casual report. "The orphanage in the North Tower is working out great. We've got about 200 kids from the war zones and they're adapting really well. Some of the older ones are already helping with basic repairs around the palace. Amazing what these young minds can figure out when you give them a chance." The Dragon Emperor finally found his voice. What have you done to my palace?" Maya looked around as if seeing the changes for the first time. "All this? Well, you were gone for so long and there were so many people who needed help. The war created millions of refugees and they had nowhere to go. Your palace is huge with hundreds of empty rooms just sitting there. It seemed like such a waste." She walked over to one of the massive windows and pointed outside. "See that field where you used to keep your war machines? It's now growing enough food to feed everyone here for months. Turns out your soil is perfect for growing vegetables. Who knew?" Drakmor's claws scraped against the floor as he moved closer to the window. His vast military parade ground had indeed been converted into neat rows of crops. Beings from dozens of different worlds worked together, harvesting vegetables under the setting sun. "And the dungeons?" he asked weakly. "Converted them into workshops. The blacksmiths are making farming tools instead of weapons. Much more useful, really. We're also running schools down there now. The acoustics are surprisingly good for teaching." A young human man approached them, carrying a steaming bowl. "Maya, the soup's ready for testing. Want to try it before we serve everyone?" She took the bowl and tasted it carefully. "Perfect, Danny. Tell the kitchen team they've outdone themselves again." As Danny walked away, Maya turned back to the stunned dragon. "So, you going to help with dinner service or are you just going to stand there looking confused? Because honestly, these people have been waiting long enough for a good meal, and I could really use those extra hands I mentioned." Drakmor stared at this small human woman who had single-handedly transformed his empire into something he barely recognized. For the first time in his long life, the mighty Dragon Emperor was completely speechless. Over the next several days, Drakmor discovered just how completely Maya had transformed his empire. What he initially thought was limited to his palace turned out to be a complete reorganization of everything he had built over centuries. The Dragon Emperor spent his first morning flying over his territories, expecting to see the familiar sight of his military outposts and mining operations. Instead, he found bustling trade centers where former enemy species worked alongside his own people. Ships from worlds he had conquered decades ago now arrived voluntarily, their holds filled with goods for peaceful exchange rather than tribute paid in fear. When he returned to the palace, Maya was in what used to be his war room, now converted into some kind of administrative center. She sat at a desk that seemed too large for her, surrounded by floating holographic displays showing supply routes, population statistics, and economic data from across his empire. "How long has this been going on?" Drakmor demanded, his voice echoing off the walls. Maya looked up from her work, completely unbothered by his intimidating tone. "Since about a week after you left for the war. I noticed some problems with how things were running and decided to fix them." She waved her hand, and one of the holographic displays enlarged to show a detailed map of the empire. Red areas indicated problems while green showed improvements. Nearly everything was green now. "Problems?" Drakmor's voice rose. "What problems?" "My empire was perfectly managed." Maya stood up and walked over to the display. Despite being barely 5 feet tall compared to his 15 feet, she seemed completely comfortable challenging him. "Your tax collection system was losing 40% of all revenue to corruption," she said matter-of-factly, pointing to a series of numbers. "Local governors were skimming off the top and nobody was checking their work. I set up a simple oversight system, and now you're collecting more taxes than ever before." She moved to another section of the display. "Your food distribution network was completely backwards. 3 entire star systems were starving while others had so much surplus food that it was rotting in warehouses. Basic logistics really. I just rerouted the supply lines to match actual need with available resources." Drakmor stared at the data, his ancient mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The numbers didn't lie. Every metric showed dramatic improvement across his territories. "But how did you get my generals to agree to this? They would never take orders from a human servant." Maya smiled for the first time since he'd returned. "That's the funny thing. They didn't realize they were taking orders from me at first. I just started making suggestions. Small ones mostly. Hey, what if we tried this instead? Or, I noticed this might work better if we changed that." She pulled up another display showing military efficiency reports. General Vextar was the first to see the results. His supply lines became so efficient that his troops were getting everything they needed ahead of schedule. Pretty soon, other generals were asking him for advice. The door to the room slid open and General Vextar himself walked in. The massive dragon, scarred from centuries of battle, stopped short when he saw his emperor. "My lord, you've returned early from the campaign. How did the war end?" "Successfully," Drakmor replied curtly. "But I'm more interested in what's been happening here. Explain to me why you've been following orders from my human maid." General Vextar looked uncomfortable, his claws clicking nervously against the floor. "Well, my lord, they weren't exactly orders. Maya just had some very good suggestions about improving our operations." "Suggestions that you followed?" "Yes, sir. And the results have been remarkable." The general gestured to the displays around the room. "Crime rates in our territories are down 60%. Production efficiency is up by half. The outer colonies are actually volunteering resources instead of requiring us to take them by force." Drakmor turned back to Maya, his golden eyes narrowing. "You've been signing documents in my name, haven't you?" "Only the important ones," Maya replied casually as if discussing the weather. "Trade agreements mostly. Some education initiatives. A few infrastructure projects. Nothing too dramatic." She pulled up a list of documents on another display. "I've been careful to stay within your established policies." "Well, mostly. I did approve that peace treaty with the mining guild, but they were offering such a good deal that it seemed foolish to wait for your return." "A peace treaty? With the mining guild? They've been our enemies for 50 years. "We're our enemies," Maya corrected. "Now they're our trading partners. Their mining operations combined with our transportation network have increased prosperity across 12 star systems. Everyone's making more money, so everyone's happier." Drakmor felt a headache building behind his eyes, something he hadn't experienced in centuries. "And you just decided all of this on your own?" Maya shrugged. "You were busy fighting a war. Someone needed to handle the day-to-day administration. I figured you hired me to take care of things, so I took care of things. She moved to a final display showing overall empire statistics. Look at these numbers. Population happiness is at an all-time high. Economic growth has tripled. Even your military is performing better because they're not spending half their time dealing with rebellions and supply problems. General Vextar nodded reluctantly. She's right, my lord. We've had more volunteers for military service in the past year than in the previous decade. People actually want to serve the Empire now. Maya sat back down at her desk and returned to her work. Plus, I've been getting requests from other Dragon Lords asking for copies of our new administrative procedures. Apparently, word is spreading about how well things are working here. Drakmor stared at this small human woman who had quietly revolutionized his entire empire while he was away fighting battles. For the first time in his long life, he wondered if there was more to ruling than simply being the biggest and strongest creature in the room. Drakmor had heard enough. His pride, built over thousands of years of absolute rule, couldn't accept what Maya had done. He was the Dragon Emperor, feared across the galaxy, and no human servant would continue making decisions in his name. Enough, he roared, his voice shaking the walls of the administrative center. I am reclaiming control of my empire. You will stop all of these activities immediately and return to your duties as a maid. Nothing more. Maya looked up from her work, studied his face for a moment, then simply nodded. Of course, Your Majesty. You're the Emperor. She stood up, walked over to the holographic displays, and began shutting them down one by one. The room grew dimmer as each screen went dark. I'll inform the department heads that they should resume previous protocols and wait for your direct orders on all matters. Good, Drakmor said, though something in Maya's calm acceptance made him feel uneasy. Should I also tell the medical teams to stop treating the wounded soldiers? They've been using supplies from your personal reserves. Yes, return everything to how it was before I left. And the schools? Should the children return to the refugee camps? Drakmor hesitated for just a moment. Everything returns to the old way. Maya picked up a simple cleaning bucket and mop that had been sitting in the corner. I understand. I'll be in the throne room if you need me. It's gotten quite dusty since I've been busy with other things. She walked out of the room without another word, leaving Drakmor alone with General Vextar, who looked extremely uncomfortable. My lord, the general began carefully, are you certain about this decision? Are you questioning my judgment, General? Never, sir. I'll inform the other commanders immediately. Within hours, Drakmor began to see the consequences of his decision. The smooth operation Maya had created started falling apart like a house built from cards. The first problem came from the food distribution system. Without Maya's coordination, the kitchen staff didn't know how much food to prepare. Some dining areas ran out of meals entirely while others had huge amounts of waste. Fights broke out among the hungry refugees who had been eating regularly for months. By the second day, the medical situation became critical. The doctors didn't know which supplies they were allowed to use anymore, so they stopped treating non-emergency cases. Wounded soldiers who had been recovering well suddenly found themselves without proper medication. The third day brought news from the outer territories. 3 different star systems sent messages asking why their regular supply deliveries had stopped. The transport ships were sitting idle because the captains didn't have proper authorization to continue their routes. General Vextar appeared in the throne room on the 4th day, looking exhausted and frustrated. My lord, we have a serious situation. The Centauri system is threatening to break their alliance because we haven't delivered the medical supplies they were promised. The mining guild is asking if our peace treaty is still valid since all communication has stopped. Drakmor sat on his throne, watching Maya quietly cleaning the floors nearby. She had said nothing about the growing chaos, just continued her original job as if nothing had changed. Handle it, he told the general. Sir, I don't know how. The old systems we used before, they don't work anymore. We've grown too big, too complex. Maya had created solutions for problems I didn't even know we had. By the end of the week, everything was falling apart. Supply lines that had worked smoothly for months were now completely broken. The refugee camps outside the palace were overcrowded and running out of food. Several planets were threatening rebellion because promised aid hadn't arrived. Drakmor found Maya in his private chambers, dusting the same shelf she had been cleaning for the 3rd time that day. Why isn't anyone fixing these problems? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Maya continued cleaning without looking at him. Because nobody knows how, Your Majesty. The old way of doing things worked when your empire was smaller and simpler. But everything has grown. There are more people, more planets, more relationships to manage. She moved to another shelf. Dragons are excellent at ruling through strength and fear. When someone steps out of line, you crush them and everyone else falls in line. It's simple and effective. But it doesn't work for everything. You can't intimidate a supply chain into being more efficient. You can't scare crops into growing faster. You can't threaten diseases into healing wounded soldiers. Maya finally looked at him directly. Humans learn different methods because we had to. We're not big enough or strong enough to force solutions. We had to find ways to make systems work better, to convince people to cooperate willingly, to solve problems through organization instead of power. She set down her cleaning cloth. Your way works perfectly for conquest. My way works better for actually running the things you've conquered. Drakmor stared out the window at his empire. Even from his palace he could see the signs of dysfunction. Smoke from uncontrolled fires in the refugee camps. Ships sitting motionless in the docking bays. Groups of people gathering in what looked like angry meetings. Show me, he said quietly. What? Show me how your methods work. Teach me what you did. Maya studied his face carefully. Are you sure? Because once I restart these systems, you'll see just how much your empire changed while you were gone. And you might not like all of it. Drakmor took a deep breath. I'm sure. Maya smiled for the second time since his return. All right then, Your Majesty. Let's go save your empire. Maya led Drakmor back to the administrative center, but this time she moved differently. Instead of the casual confidence she'd shown before, she walked with purpose, like a teacher preparing for the most important lesson of her life. The first thing you need to understand, Maya said as she reactivated the holographic displays, is that ruling and managing are two completely different skills. You're an amazing ruler. You can inspire loyalty, command respect, and make the hard decisions that others can't. But managing? That's about making thousands of small decisions work together. She pulled up a display showing the food distribution network. See the system? It looks simple from the outside. Food goes from farms to people who need it. But look closer. The display zoomed in, revealing an incredibly complex web of connections. Hundreds of planets, thousands of transport routes, millions of people all needing different things at different times. When you ruled through fear, planet governors would simply demand whatever they needed and take it by force if necessary. It worked, but it was wasteful. Planets would hoard resources they didn't need, or refuse to share surpluses because they were afraid of running short later. Maya highlighted several connections in green. I changed it so governors report actual needs and available resources weekly. Then the system automatically routes surplus from one planet to shortages on another. Nobody has to fight for resources because everyone knows there's enough to go around. Drakmor studied the display, his ancient mind working to understand the complexity. But what if they lie about their needs? What if they try to cheat the system? Some do, Maya admitted. But here's the interesting thing. The planets that participate honestly do so much better than the cheaters that peer pressure usually fixes the problem. When your neighbors are prospering and you're struggling because you're hoarding resources, you start asking what they're doing differently. She moved to another display showing military efficiency. Same principle applies to your armies. Before, generals competed with each other for resources and recognition. They'd hide problems from you because admitting weakness might cost them their positions. The new system showed generals sharing resources freely, reporting problems quickly, and even lending troops to each other when needed. How did you convince them to cooperate instead of compete? Drakmor asked. Maya smiled. I changed what they were rewarded for. Instead of rewarding individual achievement, I started tracking overall empire performance. When General Vextar helps General Korth solve a supply problem, both their ratings improve because the whole empire gets stronger. She walked over to a smaller display showing educational statistics. But the biggest change wasn't in the systems themselves. It was in how people think about their roles in the empire. The display showed thousands of small schools across the empire, teaching everything from basic mathematics to advanced engineering. When people only know how to follow orders, they can't adapt when situations change. But when they understand why they're doing something, they can figure out better ways to do it. To demonstrate, Maya called up a video feed from one of the agricultural worlds. A group of farmers were working in fields that looked completely different from traditional farming. These farmers were struggling with poor soil conditions. Under the old system, they would have reported the problem and waited for orders from above. Maybe someone would have sent different seeds, or maybe they would have just been told to work harder. The video showed crops growing in carefully designed spiral patterns, with different plants supporting each other's growth. Instead, we taught them basic agricultural science and told them their goal was to maximize food production however they could. They figured out this spiral planting method on their own. It increased their yield by 60%. Drakmor was fascinated despite himself. So you gave them knowledge instead of just orders? Exactly. And it doesn't just work for farming. Maya pulled up dozens of similar examples. Engineers who had redesigned manufacturing processes, doctors who had developed new treatment methods, even soldiers who had invented better training techniques. Humans learned this approach because we had to, Maya explained. We don't live long enough for one person to become an expert in everything. So we share knowledge, build on each other's ideas, and teach everyone to think for themselves. She paused the displays and looked directly at Drakmor. Dragons live for thousands of years. You can master every skill, remember every detail, control every decision. It makes you incredibly powerful individually. But it also means you try to manage everything personally, which limits how big and complex your empire can grow. And humans? Humans die young, so we have to build systems that work without us. We teach others to solve problems so the solutions survive even when we don't. It means any individual human is less powerful than a dragon, but a group of humans working together can accomplish things that even dragons can't do alone. Maya reactivated all the displays, showing the full scope of the Empire's operations. That's what I built while you were away. Not just better systems, but systems that teach people to improve themselves. Every person in your empire is a little bit smarter and more capable now than they were when you left. Drakmor stared at the displays in wonder. His empire hadn't just grown more efficient, it had grown more intelligent. Millions of beings who had once simply followed orders were now actively working to make things better. Show me more, he said quietly. I want to understand all of it. Maya's smile lit up the entire room. Now you're thinking like a human, Your Majesty? 3 months after Maya began teaching Drakmor her methods, the Dragon Emperor made a decision that shocked the entire galaxy. He called for a formal ceremony in what used to be his throne room, now permanently converted into the Great Hall where thousands of beings gathered daily. Representatives from hundreds of worlds filled the massive space. Dragon lords who had ruled for millennia sat alongside human farmers who had never left their home planets. Former enemies shared tables with old allies. The diversity was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen in one place. Maya stood beside the Emperor's throne, wearing simple ceremonial robes that she had insisted be practical enough for actual work. She still carried her toolkit, claiming that someone had to maintain standards even during important ceremonies. Drakmor rose from his throne, his massive form commanding attention from every being in the hall. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. For thousands of years, dragons have ruled through strength and fear. We conquered worlds, demanded tribute, and crushed any who opposed us. This method built empires, but it also built resentment, rebellion, and waste. He gestured toward Maya. This human, my former maid, showed me a different way. Not through replacing dragon strength, but through adding human intelligence to it. She proved that cooperation can be more powerful than conquest, that willing allies are stronger than fearful subjects. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as beings translated his words for those who spoke different languages. Today, I formally appoint Maya Johnson as Imperial Administrator of the Stellar Fire Empire. She will have full authority over all civilian administration, trade relations, and internal development. Her word in these matters carries the same weight as mine. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Some cheered, others looked shocked, and a few dragon lords in the audience appeared distinctly uncomfortable with this unprecedented decision. Maya stepped forward, her small human form looking almost comical next to the massive dragon emperor. But when she spoke, her voice carried the same authority as his. Thank you for this honor, Your Majesty. But this isn't about one human taking power. It's about creating a new model where every being can contribute their best abilities to our shared success. She activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the empire. The statistics were remarkable. Economic growth had tripled. Population satisfaction was at historic highs. Even military efficiency had improved dramatically. We're not just running an empire anymore, Maya continued. We're building a civilization. One where a dragon's strength protects a scientist's research, where a human's innovation improves a warrior's equipment, where everyone's contribution matters. To demonstrate her point, Maya called forward several beings from the audience. First came Dr. Kala, a reptilian scientist whose research had revolutionized medical treatment across 12 star systems. Then ZF, our insectoid engineer whose new transportation designs had cut shipping costs in half. Finally, young Tommy, a human teenager whose agricultural innovations were feeding millions. These individuals represent thousands of others who are making our empire stronger every day. Not through conquest or fear, but through knowledge, creativity, and cooperation. As if on cue, the main doors to the hall opened, and a group of dragon lords from neighboring empires entered. They had been observing the ceremony remotely and decided to attend in person when they heard Drakmor's announcement. Lord Thaimon, an ancient red dragon who ruled the Iron Star Empire, approached the throne. His expression was a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Drakmor, your economic reports have been interesting. My advisors tell me your territories are now more productive than mine, despite having fewer resources. They've been asking me to investigate your methods. Maya stepped forward before Drakmor could respond. Lord Thaimon, we'd be happy to share our administrative procedures with your empire. In fact, we've established the Interspecies Administrative Academy specifically for that purpose. She gestured to another section of the hall where humans and various alien species were setting up educational displays. We're offering free training to any administrator who wants to learn these methods. The more empires that prosper, the more stable our entire region becomes. Everyone benefits. Lord Thaimon looked intrigued despite himself. Free training? What do you gain from this? Peaceful, prosperous neighbors, Maya replied simply. Empires that are thriving internally don't need to expand through conquest. They can grow through trade and cooperation instead. Within hours of the ceremony, requests began pouring in from across the galaxy. Dragon lords who had initially mocked Drakmor's human contamination were quietly asking for copies of his administrative procedures. Some were even requesting human advisors of their own. Maya established recruitment centers on dozens of worlds, looking for humans with the right combination of intelligence, creativity, and diplomatic skills. Jackson from New Angeles became administrator for the Crystal Mining Confederation. Diana from Detroit revolutionized the Agricultural Alliance's food distribution. Kevin from Kansas City created the most efficient shipping network the galaxy had ever seen. As the months passed, the transformation spread beyond individual empires. Trade routes that had been fought over for centuries became collaborative ventures. Research projects combined knowledge from dozens of species. Even conflicts were resolved through negotiation rather than warfare, as empires realized they had more to gain from cooperation than conquest. 1 year after Maya's appointment, Drakmor and Maya stood together on the observation deck of his palace, looking out at a galaxy that was more peaceful and prosperous than anyone had thought possible. Not bad for a maid from Detroit, Maya said with a grin. Drakmor's rumbling laugh echoed across the starlit view. Maya Johnson, you didn't just clean my palace. You cleaned up the entire galaxy. The Dragon Emperor paused, then added more seriously, you taught us all that real strength isn't about being the biggest or the strongest. It's about making everyone around you stronger too. Maya nodded, already planning tomorrow's improvements. Now that's thinking like a human, Your Majesty.